Good day everyone. Once we have decided the configuration of the drone that we are going to use in our previous lecture, let's decide on the kind of payload that we would require for our drone. In our current lecture, we will be looking at the different kinds of payloads and the mounting requirement for those payloads. Let's look at the payloads in much more detail now in our lecture. There are various payloads that are available with the drone. As you can see in the slide, a drone can be equipped with various payloads such as high precision cameras, lidars, as well as payload drop mechanisms. One of the most commonly payloads that are used with a drone is high precision cameras. These cameras capture the videos and images, and using techniques such as photogrammetry are able to create a volumetric contour of the entire area. Many times we use thermal cameras also for locations where there is a difference between the temperatures, such as for observing a forest to find any localization of temperature in the area. However, in terms of accuracy, the cameras prove to be lesser accurate in terms of as compared to lidar. A lidar uses a beam of light to create a point cloud data of the location. In applications such as overground mining or underground mining, the point cloud data is captured using the lidar, and a more accurate volumetric data of the survey required is obtained as compared to the cameras. However, one of the major overheads is the amount of data generated by the lidar and the time required for the software to create a 3D map out of that data. It is very important to keep all these aspects in mind while deciding on the payload of the drone. So, if you have to decide what payload you want to put on the drone, if the requirement only demands survey and getting the videos or images, a camera or one of the different types of camera will do. However, if it involves much more detailed capture of the location and higher accuracy of the location, a lidar will be required in that instance. Other payloads, such as drop mechanisms or so, will be required if the mission of the drone is to drop some payload at a particular location. Once you decide onto the payload, the next step is how do you mount the payload onto the drone. One option is to directly mount the payload onto the drone. However, doing so will create a lot of errors in the measurement of the payload because of the vibrations and impact that will be transmitted from the drone to the payload. This will result in lower accuracy of the data that is obtained from the payload, and in some instances can even damage the payload. Therefore, the payload is usually attached to a gimbal which is mounted on the frame of the drone. What is the role of the gimbal here? The gimbal is used to stabilize the payload and make sure that vibrations are not transmitted to the payload. Therefore, any instabilities occurring in the drone are taken care by the gimbal, making sure that the payload is safe and accurate while measurement. The gimbal also allows the movement of the payload in particular axis. Single axis and 3-axis gimbals are very useful in rotating the payload, which allows it more flexibility while capturing data from the payload. Along with isolating the vibrations and providing control of the payload, the gimbal also provides protection to the payload in case of impact of the drone. As you can see in the slide, these are some of the examples of the gimbal that are attached to the drone. As we attach the payload to the drone, there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. First is never keep the payload or any portion of the payload extruded in the flow stream of the propellers. This will cause a loss of lift and a lot of vibrations of the payload, which can be very dangerous during the drone's mission. Keep in mind that the payload should be placed such that the CG is at a stable location in the drone. Next is always point the payload closer to the frame of the drone. The reason is, if the payload is mounted far away, what we observe is something like a cantilever effect, where the payload and the support vibrates because of the attachment. This further leads to a lot of vibrations of the drone, which can further make the drone flight unsuitable. So, Therefore, always have the payloads closer to the body of the drone and compact in nature. Payloads also require a certain amount of battery based on the specifications of the payload. You can either take the source from the battery of the drone or have a separate battery source for the same. It is always better to have a separate battery source for the payload so as to avoid lowering the endurance of the drone. Also, many times, what we have observed in cameras is that when they are given the battery source, the cameras tends to have some noise or flicker during flight. This is because they are using the same battery source as the drone. However, keep in mind that a separate battery source will add to the payload weight, so that keep in mind while you are giving a separate battery to the payload. Lastly, always keep your payload secured such that in case of an accident, the possibility of damaging or detachment of the payload from the drone is minimal. I'll give you an example. If you attach a very costly lidar to the drone for carrying out the survey, make sure the lidar is well protected in case of an impact of the drone. Because what happens is many times during the impact, the payload comes in first contact with the ground, and you do not want a costly payload to be damaged because of being hit to the ground. So always make sure that whenever you are attaching a payload, keep, keep enough safety measures around the payload so that it can work efficiently as well as it is protected in terms of any damage or any crashes of the drone. To summarize, in our current lecture, we discussed on how to decide the payload for the drone based on the application. We also looked at the requirement to add the gimbal along with the payload and what all safety measures we have to keep in mind while attaching the payload. Now all of this adds weight. So in our next lecture, we will look at the details of the weight of the drone. Thank you very much.